Hi folks, I'm Dan Peterson. Welcome back to another episode of The Hole on the Corner, episode 3. We've been on our whirlwind tour of all of Lafferty's novels. We did one on the 60s, the 70s, and today we do the 80s. And as I said, in the 60s he breaks out, he's writing what he thinks is science fiction, kind of is, but like no one else would do it. He's a darling of the new wave writers, a writer's writer. They all praise him. Samuel Delany and Roger Zelazny and Harlan Ellison and all these people are like, whoa, this Lafferty guy, so strange and interesting, right? And then in the 70s, he kind of takes a left turn, as I said, and I feel like he never comes back from that, and you either go with him or you don't. And he gets, in a way, a little more literarily ambitious in the 70s, and starts to write historical novels and things that, very, very roughly could be called magical realism or magical realism adjacent, and these sorts of things, as well as some more takes on sort of speculative fiction, but that are even more ambitious and philosophical, and just some wonderful, wonderful stuff in there. And then the 80s come along, and he seems to have this fresh burst where he seems to want to take on science fiction and fantasy again. And he kind of takes another left turn, which kind of, if you take a left and another left, you're kind of coming back the way. And I do think that he kind of reaches back to that first spate of novels with like Space Shanty and Fourth Mansions and Past Master and Reefs of Earth and the sort of raucous good fun that those things were, though they were packed and layered too and strange and all that. But he also is kind of he's still moving forward because he's also bringing some of that philosophical ambition from the 70s into this renewed era as well. So it begins in 1982 with this novel called Aurelia. I think it's a pretty fun cover. It actually opens up into a larger illustration. And somebody asked me what I mean by pyrotechnics. I see here that Poul Anderson, his quote on the back says, dazzling inventiveness and pyrotechnic style, unique, incomparable. So I'm not the first to say pyrotechnics, but yeah, so this is filled with illustrations by Larry Todd. Okay, I don't know who that is. I think some of them are pretty fun. That's their spaceships on top of needles that they take off from. It's a little cartoony, some of it, but it has a nostalgia for me because it's like a lot of illustrations from my childhood, kind of 70s, 80s style that was in a lot of stuff. The amazing thing about this is built off of Lafferty's short stories, particularly these two stories about the planet Cameroy and the precocious children of that planet and their education system. And they're very funny stories that just are wild, and they have like this curriculum that's really intense. But the curriculum ends, when you go back and look at the stories, you realize it ends with their final assignment in school is to go from their planet off and govern another planet, and then they get to graduate. And that's the premise that this picks up. Aurelia is a Cameroy kid who's off on this assignment with some other kids. They all take off in different directions, so we just follow Aurelia. But it says that she kind of slept through like star navigation, celestial navigation. So she gets lost, has no idea where she's going, ends up on planet Earth, considered kind of a backwoods, although it's never explicitly called planet Earth. It's like, is it this planet, is it that planet? But you can tell it is. And that's the thing about Lafferty's planets in the short fiction and all the novels about planets, like Past Masters, Astrobi, and all the planets mentioned in Space Shanty and all that, and another novel we're going to look at. But this is, they all tie together. They're all part of one universe of planets, and they're cross-mentioned a lot in the various stories and novels. And so in this one, I believe, actually mentions every single planet he ever came up with in all the stories and novels. I don't know if it seems he went back and tried to do that. It's just kind of a funny thing. But so Aurelia comes there, and she has to get acclimated, and there's hijinks and craziness and grotesqueries and what have you. But she finally gets on mission, and she starts walking about and basically like preaching, giving these like sermons, kind of political, ethical, somewhat theological sermons. They call them homilies. And they basically have like a Eucharistic breakfast every day, and then she launches into her homilies. And so it's kind of like a daily mass type thing. And as I've said before, don't sleep on Lafferty's theological fiction, because it's fascinating, and it speaks to a lot of different kinds of ideas and philosophies that can be, conversation partners with it. And it's tricky. It's like, what are you doing here? So I remember seeing a review on Amazon that said that Aurelia's speeches were flatulent. And I can completely understand how they would come across that way. But objectively, that is false, because it implies they're stinky hot air, and they're just not. You might not like the message. You might not like the delivery system, et cetera, et cetera. But the substance of what's said is the real deal. It's Aristotelian, Thomistic virtue ethics. And Gregorio Montejo writes a really good essay on that in Feast of Laughter 3, which Feast of Laughter is a sort of journal zine that Lafferty fandom puts out with scholarly articles and fan articles and that kind of thing. And it's a really good article, and it's about how the format of this novel kind of fits like what a New Testament gospel does, and maybe I wonder too if it kind of fits Gnostic gospels too, but it's so full of lovely wonders and stuff, as well as her speeches. It's not just that. The speeches I think are quite good and interesting, but there's a lot of stuff going on. An example, so she walks around and her spaceship floats above her and kind of follows her around. And there's a part where, as it says here, there were prodigies all that afternoon. Not only were the constellations to be seen in the very bright afternoon sky, not only did the birds bark and hoot, but the fish talked to Rex Golightly, the tycoon. So, and Lafferty often does this, here comes a prodigy, a marvel. Fish are talking to this guy. And he kind of doubles down on it in kind of a strange way. So he says, it was only by private device that the fish talked to Rex, and he to them. Actually, he was talking to the fluvial and oceanic components of himself rather than to the fish. But some of his components exteriorized themselves rather starkly. So, you go from the fish are talking to him to he's talking to his oceanic inner self, which actually connects to some current like eco-philosophy. I'm thinking of some stuff that like Stacey Alamo says and stuff. So there's cool connections with a lot of contemporary theory and discourse I always find in Lafferty. Not that it's all about academic stuff, but for me, I find that interesting. But often, he says a marvel, complicates it one way, and then complicates it again and again. So like from there it says, then how if this is happening inside him, it says, then how did other people hear the fish talking to Rex if it was done by private device? Oh, other people possess private devices also. So like that's the solution. And he goes on talking about how there's this horn music from visible and invisible horns, a new sort of syncopation. It was something that had never been done before. But besides all these prodigies, there was the prodigy of the monkey. This was the monkey that ran up and down the dangling ladder from Aurelia's spaceship to herself, bringing her data and assurances. But the hanging ladder used by the monkey was invisible. Of course it was. Though it was very rope-like as it blew in the wind and buffeted the monkey. And there was something very wrong with the monkey. So already you've got a monkey on an invisible rope, given Aurelia data, and then there's something wrong with the monkey. What is it? Somebody asks, did you make that monkey? And she's like, yes, I did. But the guy who asks her is riding a speckled mule, and she's like, but you didn't make your mule, did you? And he's like, no, I didn't. However, I brainwashed it to think that I made it. And it's just, I can understand why these novels kind of overwhelm people sometimes with paragraph after paragraph after paragraph after paragraph of just stacking up the tall tale marvels and wonders like that. But, you know, it hangs together more than it might seem. I do think this one is maybe a bit rambling and meandering in a way. Some of Lafferty's novels that do that aren't as satisfying to me in that regard. This one I really don't mind. I enjoy the ramble, but I can understand why some might not enjoy it as much. There's a part where in the midst, you know, she starts the day also with usually some kind of call to everyone and blows a horn maybe. And in one case she blows this giant ram's horn and it says that all these monsters start tumbling out of it as she's blowing it. And crazy stuff. It's talking about how the inside of the horn is bigger than the outside, so these sometimes giant monsters are coming out of it and stuff. And it says that dragons are coming out, and flying reptiles, sky-flying fish, winged spiders and hydras, sea cattle, deep-sea tigers, sea serpents, you know, behemoths, leviathans, mammoths, mastodons, you know, on and on it goes, giant insects and just crazy stuff. And it talks about how the horn had already been cleansed of its evil because there's this whole discourse about men with horns shouldn't be trusted, but men with antlers, those are good guys. You know, and you see these men with horns and antlers on the front cover. But yeah, it said it had been cleansed of its evil. So these monsters are not evil. They're just neutral, you know, which is actually all throughout there's monster discourses in Lafferty about what monsters are and aren't, and almost a theology of monsters in a lot of it. And Fourth Mansions has this Past Master, this novel, another novel we'll look at. And this really, I used some of this for my monster theory aspects of my PhD, and I really think it speaks to monster theory. So all kinds of good stuff like that. And there's poignancy. It's really cool. There's this cousin Clutie who is almost described like almost like a devil type character, but he's actually sort of allied to Aurelia, and he represents almost like this dark side of her, almost like a Jungian shadow side that's essential to her message and all these kinds of things. That's what I mean by this like kind of complex, interesting sort of theological approach that he has, and you're not entirely sure what that's all about. So Aurelia, I think it's a pretty good blast. But then we come to my favorite, my favorite novel of the 80s for sure. It's a contender for my very favorite R.A. Lafferty novel, Annals of Klepsis. And you can see this pirate ship on front of a planet, because that's basically it's a pirate planet that these people come to. And how do you describe this novel? This all these experimental novels of the 80s kind of have their quirks that can be a little difficult and these kinds of things. This does too, but for me this just really coheres somehow. It is a riot of a novel. It is a multicolored, psychedelic riot of a novel, but it somehow really has this through line to it. It's a carnival. It starts with like a literal like sort of carnival and festival, and I think ends with one as well. And it's a very carnivalesque novel, as is all of Lafferty's work, but this is really especially so. And there, you know, there's a part toward the beginning where during this festival they've barbecued this whale, and everybody's eating whale meat, barbecued whale, but they've carved out the inside. People have started a campfire in there, and there's a storyteller holding forth inside the belly of a whale, you know, and it's just like, and people are coming after some other people, so they start shooting the whale with guns, and bullets are flying through. And you know, but there's poignant, powerful stuff. This guy is tortured and covered in wounds, and he dives in a giant vat of wine that heals his wounds and heals his mind and all this kind of stuff. And but my favorite aspect is this part where they talk about these planetary jumps that can be done. They've come by spaceship, but they learn that if you're on the ocean in a sailing ship, you can do a planetary jump to another planet's ocean, and they mean to do one at this one point. And they talk about how they call it the jump, the biological planetary jump. And they explain that plants and animals do not have spaceships. They jump through the hiatus. They jump through the bush. They jump through the jungle. And when humans do make the planetary jumps, there is a very strange symbiosis or parasitism as a side effect. They pick up green mementos on their jump. For instance, this character, the crazy character names that Lafferty has, Fairbridge Exendine pulled up his seaman's sweater. Green leaves and fronds were growing from his belly. And some of the others like pull up their shirts and like, hey, I got it too, you know, and like they're looking on the side of the ship. Oh, it's all over the ship and stuff. We've jumped through space, you know. And you know, just it's such a cool ecological, like astro-ecological sort of idea that they go through a biotic medium, it says, when they do the jump. And it says we couldn't jump without picking up some of it. Jump space is fantastically populated, with botany. My God, what botany. The interstellar dust that some astronomers write about is interstellar botany, etc. And then they make a jump, try to make a jump to another planet. They end up in this space where there's no sky and there's this overarching sort of like jaggy roof, and they're in this like red and ochre water that's like pumping them forward. And they basically finally realize, oh my God, we're inside the brain canals of one of the characters. So good. And it's like it's like a depressing landscape populated with like all these millions of people who are depressed. And it turns out they're in the brain of Brannigan, one of the main characters. And then you realize, oh, this chapter is titled The Introspection of Brannigan. They're in Brannigan's brain, and he's depressed because he's thinking about this doomsday equation that's a central part of the book. And a doctor who knows Brannigan and has worked on his brain before says, oh, I'm sure this is Brannigan's brain. I think I recognize the part. And he climbs up to get to it. And then they jump back out, and they're back in the ocean on Klepsis. And that leaves him hanging up in the air, and he falls. He fell to the foredeck like a plummet and was killed and curdled into an unsavory mass. People are always dying gruesomely in Lafferty. And the other characters, how do they react? One says, let the rule be, do not ever climb so high on the cliffs of imagination that the fall from the top will kill you. And another says, a good line. And he wrote it down in his pocket notebook. You know, so, you know, it's just, Lafferty's fiction is full of that kind of stuff, but this novel, I just can't even begin to tell you the wonders and whatnot going on in here. And it's quite philosophical and has some profound things to say, I think. So we get to, so that was 1983. Then 1984, we have Half a Sky. This has some illustrations in it as well. This we talked about in the 70s, a novel called The Flame is Green. This is the continuation of that. And it has like these paintings in it as well as some illustrations. This, as I said, the other one, they're historical novels set in the 19th century. Dana Coscowan is the Irish hero of it. And they have a lot of Irish kind of humor and wonder, but they kind of range around like Europe in the first novel. And here they start to go around other parts of the world. This is him fighting a monstrous stallion on a tropical island. And I haven't finished this, but I love this passage that I'm on that's in Ecuador, and the things it does with sort of oceanography, topography, local culture, and all kinds of things is quite cool. And this one's actually more properly a fantasy than the first book. So they never published the other two books in the series, though they're complete, and I'm sure they will be published at some point. So it'll be interesting to see if the genre keeps shifting a little bit every time or not. But yeah, this is some quality stuff. This is strong. And then we have My Heart Leaps Up, which is the first novel in a 4-part series called In a Green Tree, and it came out. You know, this is where things started to go for Lafferty, just pure independent press, right down to like almost zines, and 2 chapters at a time. Chris Drum heroically put this stuff out. And I haven't finished this. This is super special, though. My God, this is just wow. I don't know how to describe it. I think it's different than almost anything else I've read by Lafferty, save maybe the Argo mythos has some similar qualities. But it's kind of coming of age, autobiography about his real sort of life, but not really about him. It's about all his like sort of classmates and stuff. So it's weird in that it kind of lacks a central character because it's a group of characters. So you don't quite get that sort of, it's like a Bildungsroman. But like, there's too many characters for that to quite work, and it almost has a more picaresque type quality where it's just a series of events and adventures and stuff. But it talks about their schooling and all this different stuff, and it is quite Mark Twainish, maybe the most Lafferty got like that in some ways. But I don't think it's really exactly magical realism, nor is it fantasy or what have you. But it is full of marvels and stuff, and strange things happen, and it's kind of tall tale really again, but in this like very Oklahoma realized sort of setting. So it's truly great stuff, and I can't wait till they put it out as a real novel. Allegedly, Catistic Press, who puts out Feast of Laughter, is going to put out all 4 novels in a Green Tree series, and I think that's going to be something really remarkable. So we rounded out with 3 more wild adventure, fantastical novels. Serpent's Egg is this. It comes out in '87, and it's about these children, 12 children. They're all 9 years old. They've been raised in groups of 3, and now they're all coming together as the 12, and they're part of an experiment where they're precocious, and they've also been enhanced, and they're meant to find new ways of seeing the world, as it says. But it's this oppressive government that doesn't want them to see new ways that they don't approve of. And of course they do. And there's assassins trying to kill them and whatever. But here's the kicker. The 12 children, only 2 of them are human. The others are like a seal, an elephant, a python, who's also a prophetess, she-bear, they all talk. They're speaking agents and stuff. And the bear, they call her Mother Dubu. She becomes kind of the mother figure of the group. She has all these like incredible like wisdom sayings or wisdom fables that she says all the time that are just some of the best parts of the book. And so, but what they achieve in terms of these new ways of seeing the world is that they kind of together construct this like dream ocean, this psychic dream ocean in the middle of Oklahoma that's like growing all the time and getting populated with sea life until eventually there are these whales that are constructing these monuments of marble on the ocean floor by means of these millions of sea lice doing the carving by the whale's instruction. and it says that they make all these faces, and the faces, like it says, like mostly it was famous whales of yore, but also there were human faces, there were other animal faces, there were the faces of gods and the faces of computers, and that's what Lafferty does again and again to kind of undercut anthropocentrism, where we put humans at the center of everything and have a lack in ecological view. He places us in this company and kinship that not only includes all the rest of the fauna on the planet, it includes all the rest of the sort of abiota, rocks and rivers and trees and mountains and things are quite alive entities in his fiction, and furthermore, supernatural entities like angels and demons. And I forgot to mention, not only are they all these kids, there's an angel kid, 9-year-old. It says of him, he's a really low level angel. He won't be missed in heaven, And there's a computer girl. So as part of the children of this experiment, and so and that's kind of the vision that they achieve, and they're beleaguered and what have you. Has some similarities thematically to Past Master, but it's a different kind of story. I think the prose is, some of the prose in these novels, Annals of Klepsis, I think, is up there with the earlier stuff. Some of the prose almost takes a little bit of a backseat just to like keep throwing these marvels at you, and I think it's a pretty good trade-off. That said, there's still a lot of wonderful sentences in these novels, and then this is Well, okay, so let's, I'm not trying to be mean to the person that made this cover, but it's funny. There is a fawn in the story. This is basically Lafferty's treatise on fairy tale and myth. And it's actually set in contemporary or possibly a near future time. And it starts out with this couple who has these computers that are infested by poltergeists who get lonely, so they stable goats with the computers to keep them from being lonely. And that's the kind of thing that these 80s novels are filled with, just one after the other throughout these novels. And sometimes they serve the story, and sometimes they're just for fun, extra. And I suppose people might find that distracting and sort of like, well, how does this all add up? And it doesn't necessarily, but I think in a quite a philosophical way that's saying everything is everything. Everything is more than what we can cope with. There is no one true, absolutely coherent way to summarize existence, or what have you. Even though Lafferty had very strong beliefs about that kind of stuff, he still, writes in such a way that it's like mystery upon mystery. And but they basically their whole thing is just like the characters are like, is this real? Are we real? Is any of this happening? That's kind of the point of the novel. But it's a cast of characters that are wild. There's a couple, shapeshifters. There's a woman who turns into a snake, and a man who turns into a panther. There's a kid that has a growth on his belly that's a face, that's a separate person from him, and they do a vaudeville act for a little while. And it's actually, that passage, when it introduces him, is super creepy and funny, but creepy. And it reminds me of almost something like Thomas Ligotti would write, but minus Ligotti's bleakness, but it's still scary-ish. And it's also about the scribbling giants and how they write the world. There's a limited number of these giants who write the world and maintain the world with their writing. And all throughout this period especially, you can just, it's on Lafferty's mind. His vocation as a writer is weighing heavily on him. And he's working that out through his fiction, and especially this novel. One of the giants is with them for a while, and he gets gruesomely murdered, so they need to replace a giant, to keep the world going. And so which character is it going to end up being, and all this kind of stuff. There's like the cast of characters includes like this part where they dig up this statue of the laughing Christ, which we last heard about in the Fall of Rome. And out of that statue comes a fawn, and they're all part of the company together. And like the laughing Christ statue is a character. It doesn't talk, but they keep talking about the way the light shines on its face as if that's its contribution to the conversation or something. It's just, man. This one I do think gets choked up. I do think it gets too theory heavy in points. I mean, I like what it says, and it's super interesting, but it doesn't always entirely work as fiction, unless again maybe we try to treat it as theory fiction. But it's worth the price. It's all these wonders that it's stacked with. I think are worth the price of maybe some unevenness. So that's East of Laughter, and then we have Sindbad, the 13th Voyage, and this fits in with the planetary novels. Space Shanty, Pastmaster, Annals of Klepsis, Aurelia, and it has an Arabic, Islamic, kind of medieval Islam and Christianity type theme to it, but kind of a futuristic interplanetary perspective on that. And again, it's all about writers and writing. I haven't quite finished it, but it has some of the most jaw-dropping moments I've seen, and I don't know how to begin to describe it. There's a lot of action-adventure type stuff, but discourse too, and just the wonders of how it works and what it does with writing in particular. It's very meta, very metafictional, but in a super entertaining way. That more or less finishes things off. I don't have a physical copy of The Elliptical Grave from 1989. I do have it on my phone. So whenever I'm stuck and I've forgotten to bring a book and then there's nothing to do and I'm stuck somewhere, I open that up and read a little more of it. And it's properly like theory fiction. And I forgot to rank these as romps or rants, but you can kind of see they're a mixture of romping and ranting, most of them. But Elliptical Grave is just a pure rant. It's like college kids and professors sitting around in a room talking about crazy ideas. that are super cool and weird stuff happens while they're talking, and acrobats are up in the ceiling trying to drop a chandelier on somebody and stuff, and they're going to go on this like field trip to like maybe an archaeological site or geological site, etc. So yeah, that's Lafferty's experimental 80s stuff, which paves the way for the unpublished novels that actually by and large get a little more experimental, and wow, I hope they get published, because I almost like them even better than these. I think, or some of them, I think work even better than these do. But okay, and I'm not going to talk about the rest of the Argo mythos that comes out in the early 90s. I love Dottie and all that. I'll just dedicate a whole separate video to that. But thank you so much. I keep trying to make these kind of short, but it's a lot of stuff to get through. So that's the 80s novels, and now we've gotten all the way through the novels. I think I might do a summary video. I'm going to talk about a few other things in different videos and get on to talking about the short story collections after that. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hope you guys are enjoying this. Please comment. Tell me what you think of these novels if you've read them and that kind of stuff. And take care. We'll see you next time. Bye.